Morning, everyone. Okay. Parak Test Mishna Aleph. A quick introduction. Truma was given to the Kohanim, as we know, for eating, drinking, anointing. Planting Truma is prohibited. If one did plant Truma, the seeds, let's say the kernels of some Truma grain, that which grows from it is chulin on a biblical level. Based on Torah law, it's not Truma anymore. It's something new. It's chulin. It's tevel. Actually, you need to separate Trumas and Maisis from it. The rabbis, however, decreed that whatever grows from the Truma must be treated as Truma. So, Midaraisa, if you, according to Torah law, if you plant Truma seeds, what grows wouldn't be Truma. But rabbinically, the rabbis made it a decree that it should be treated like Truma. Okay? Our Mishnah discusses what is done with the field in which Truma was planted. So Mishna reads, Hazareya Truma Shogeg. A person plants Truma seeds. They did it unintentionally. He didn't know they were Truma seeds. Yufach, if he wants to, he can turn it over. Meaning, he can plant over the land, turn over everything, so that they don't grow. And he can go ahead and replant something else in its place. You don't have to do it. You want to leave it to grow and it'll have a status of Truma. That's up to you. But there's no prohibition against, there's no problem if you want to basically turn over the ground, stop the whole thing from growing to be able to start anew. That's if you did it unintentionally. Now, okay, good. Now, this is talking about, again, he takes the seeds, he realizes he planted Truma, he can undo it. Umezid, what if he plants it intentionally? He knew it was Truma and he did it anyway. So then we say Yekayim. He has to leave it. He has to leave it grow. Now, what is the explanation here? Why does it intentionally have to leave it grow? So Rambam in his commentary says it's a penalty. Basically, this person wasn't supposed to plant the Truma, and he did. And it's quite possible that he planted the Truma, maybe even knowing that what would grow wouldn't be according to Torah law Truma, but according to the rabbis, it is Truma. But he planted what he wasn't supposed to do. So as a penalty, we actually, instead of allowing him to undo what he did, because as we see, these crops haven't really grown enough yet to be considered really anything. Nonetheless, if you did it intentionally, you're not allowed to undo it. You have to let it grow, which really means by letting it grow, you won't be able to plant other crops. When you're left with crops that have the status of Truma, there's not much you can do with it. It doesn't go well on the market. The only people who could eat it are Kohanim, and even they can only eat it if they're in a state of purity, or it's in a state of purity, and therefore there's not a lot of profit if you have to do with this Truma and sell it. But nonetheless, the sages penalize the person who intentionally planted Truma seeds with this penalty that he's got to let it grow. What's going to grow is going to have to get treated as Truma, and he won't be able to grow other things in its place. It's a penalty that's done. Now, imhevi shlish. If let's say, though, we're talking about that you planted Truma seeds, and you did not undo it right away. They already grow a third of their growth. At that point, Bein Shegib and Mezid Yikayim, where the original planted it intentionally or unintentionally, you got to leave it be. Once it's a third, it's already considered grown. Once it's already grown, you can't destroy Truma, right? Truma, you could eat it. If it becomes tamei and it's oil, you could burn it, but you can't destroy it. And therefore, even if you planted unintentionally, being that right now it grew a third, that's already considered grown. You have something grown, you have something edible. That's the point. And therefore, it already gets the status of Truma. Now, there's a very interesting point that has to be made here, and that is that, we've learned previously that you have grain that's still attached to the ground. You cannot make that Truma. Only after it's detached from the ground could it become Truma. And here, we're already saying that it's still attached to the ground, and you can't destroy it because that has the status of Truma, rabbinic Truma. which means that in this case, when the Chachamim decreed that what grows from Truma is Truma, the terminology is Gedulei Truma Truma, that what grows from Truma is the status of Truma, they extended that status to even when it's still attached to the ground, that normally you couldn't make Truma, you couldn't make grain Truma at that point, it's still planted attached to the ground. Nonetheless, the Chachamim, when they decreed that what grows from the Truma seeds is Truma, already has status of Truma while it's still connected to the ground. Therefore, if it's already grown a third, so it's considered grown, we can look at it as Truma, and therefore you can't destroy it. Earlier than a third, we don't look at that as Truma, because it's not edible, and Truma only applies things that are edible. And also, if let's say you had grain that was a regular grain that was attached from the ground, it only becomes liable to Truma if it grew for a third. The obligation of Truma only takes effect if it at least grew a third. So therefore, a third is already something that's considered grain that is connected, that's possible to have Truma on it. And even it's possible to be Truma. And even though while it's still attached to the ground, typically you couldn't make a Truma, the sages did. But they only did, even when it's attached, to make a Truma, is if it reached a stage that Truma is a possibility. Regular Truma would be a possibility for this grain. And since it's either below a third not edible, let's say for a third it's not edible, so therefore it has no connection to Truma whatsoever, and therefore before that point, if you did it unintentionally, you could undo it. You could basically destroy it, be able to plant something new. Ubepishtan. Now let's say what we're talking about here is the Truma seeds were flax seeds. Now flax is typically grown not for its seed, it's planted for its stalk. From the stalk, you take out the strands, whatever it is, to make linen from. But if you did plant the flax to eat the seeds, because they are edible, then there will be an obligation of Truma on them. So let's say you had flax seeds that were Truma, and you planted those flax seeds. So now what grows from those flax seeds is Truma, meaning not only future seeds are Truma, but even the stalks are considered Truma. And the Mishna says that if you planted flax, you planted it intentionally, you have to undo it. You have to uproot it. You have to undo it. You have to plow it over and destroy it. And the Matan says that applies even if it grew a third. I mean, even at the point that we say by other crops that it was even by shegig, if it already grew a third, you can't destroy it. Here, by the flax rather, we say that you destroy it no matter what. Again, only if you're mazed, if you're intentional. But if you're intentional, you have to destroy it. I mean, if you remember before, when you were unintentional by other crops and have to destroy it, you're allowed to destroy it. Here, the commentaries explain that we're talking about flax. You have to destroy it, and it even applies if it's a third of the way grown. And that's because the sages were concerned with the following. Sages were concerned that someone who plants these flax seeds, so he started off with seeds, they were Truma. Now he plants them. What comes out of them is Truma. He may assume that only the seeds are Truma, because only the seeds originally were Truma. So what grows, the seeds that grow from the seeds are Truma, but these stalks are not Truma. And the stalks are really the main thing that's used. They do have a status of Truma on them because they are the main part of the plant. But this person might think that it's only that it started off as the seeds that were Truma, and therefore only the seeds that grow out of it are Truma, and the stalks are not. And the Chachamim are very concerned with that possibility, and the possibility of using those linen stalks, those flax stalks. And therefore they said, destroy it. No matter at what point that it is, even if it's already a third of the way grown, destroy it. They were very concerned with this kind of misperception, and therefore they said, destroy it. Now what's interesting is that, if it already grew a third, as we said before, rabbinically it's already Truma, which means you're actually destroying Truma, which we said before, you shouldn't. I mean, we know Truma is not allowed to be destroyed, and if this is rabbinically Truma, not allowed to destroy it. Nonetheless, the Chachamim seemingly here were more concerned with this problem of using the flax stalks, which you're not allowed to use, which people might think you could use. They're more concerned with that than with the destruction of what they gave a status of truma to. And therefore, when it comes to the flax seeds that you grew, no matter at what point that it is, destroy it, so that people don't come to use the flax stalks thinking that they're not truma, and only the seeds that grew from the flax seeds are truma. Okay. Again, we're dealing with these kishuf and sorcery, witchcraft, whatever you want to call it. So we have another form of this kind of behavior. Not to do what's called the act of yidoni, which they again translate here as a yidoni is the person who performs it. They call him a kind of wizard. Shadema, as it states, al tifnu vel yidonim, do not turn to the yidonim. Talking about the people who do this. Yidoni who? What is the yidoni? What does he do? He takes the bone from a bird that was called a yadua, hence the word yidoni, befiv in his mouth. He puts the bone in his mouth. Umakterla, and then it says he burns incense to it. He does other actions until its wing falls off. So I'm assuming that he takes this bone, the bone from the yadua. The bone has a wing, puts it in his mouth. He offers incense to it. He does other things until the wing falls off. The Yidaber Asidus, and then after that, he speaks of the future. The transgression here is performed both by the person who does the asking, meaning a person wants to ask the future from a Yidoni. There's a prohibition. There's also prohibition from the person being asked, the person who performs it. Unlike the other cases we said before, some of the other examples where it was forbidden from the Torah to perform, but to ask, of such a person to perform their, magic to be able to find out the future or whether to do something, that was only rabbinically prohibited. Here, it's very clear that the prohibition goes on both. And that really leads to the next mitzvah. And that is mitzvah shalishal shalishal ba'oiv, mitzvah shalishal b'yadoni. Oiv was the kind of thing that we did before, which was, the person, let's say, spoke to a skull and, found out the answers from the skull. That was the Ov. The Yidoni is what we discussed today. Now we have the prohibitions not to ask of a person who performs Ov, not to ask from a person who is a Yidoni. The Torah includes in the prohibition one who asks of these people. Of the person, the Ov means the person who performs, what we mentioned yesterday. The Yidoni is the person who performs what we mentioned today. Now, the one who asks of them, again, it's prohibited from the Torah to ask, but it's only deeper, it's only talking, there's no action involved. He gets lashes of rebelliousness, which means lashes that are given by the rabbis. The rabbis instituted certain cases of giving lashes, and where the Torah doesn't mandate it, to give lashes to a person for their rebelliousness. But you don't get the lashes of the Torah because there was no act performed. But if let's say he acts based on these questions, then he does get lashes. The Torah lashes are 39. That's the starting point, unless the rabbinical court that's administering the lashes evaluates the person who can't handle it. Makas Mardis, the lash of rebelliousness works differently. But what we're saying here is that just asking of these sorcerers, asking an act, speaking is not considered a maisa, an act that carries with it the punishment. But if you act upon what you did, then you will get punished. This applies in all places at all times. both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day.